it's Michaela and you're watching FunsizedStyle. Today's video is going to be one that is, I don't even know how to describe it. Bittersweet, I guess. A lot of different thoughts and aspects of this experience that I'm going to share today. And as you can tell by the title, I am going to be sharing my experience as a tissue transplant. I received specifically a bone graft transplant recipient and kind of what that involves. And honestly, there's a lot more to it than I thought there was when it came to tissue transplant and having a bone graft done during my spinal fusion surgery. So I've touched on this a few times in different segments of my spinal fusion experience series, but I knew that I wanted to make a dedicated video on my experience as a tissue transplant recipient and what that means, and just experience as a whole, what it means to me. The opportunity that I had to write a letter to my donor family. We've all heard about organ transplant and the importance of that, but something that you don't hear a lot about or a lot of recipients talk about is tissue transplant. Most organ donor recipients, talk about their experience in some capacity, but I've never heard of other people talking about their tissue transplant as a tissue transplant recipient and their experience and what that has given them, because depending on the level of medical severity that you're in, it can really impact your life in a huge way. Even if it's a small situation, like if you are a tissue transplant recipient, like that is still, in my eyes, just as big of a gift as being a recipient of an organ donor. That's how it was for me, given my severity of scoliosis and the amount of work that it was going to take, and skill and resources that it took to get my spine in the best shape possible. My spine is not perfect. My surgeon utilized a lot of hardware in my spine, 20 pieces of hardware to be exact, and also the use of a bone graft. I want to talk about where this bone graft comes from, my experience of being a tissue transplant recipient, what that means to me, and again, the experience, the opportunity that I had to write a letter to my donor family, and also talk a little bit about the organization 125 Live. This video is not sponsored by them, like they don't even know that I'm making this video. I just really want to shed light on as a tissue transplant recipient, because again, organ transplant is so well known and well talked about, but people don't realize the impact that tissue transplants can also have on the lives of so many people. So that's what I'm here to shed light about today. And I also want you to come to this video with an open heart and an open mind, because I know that not everyone agrees with organ transplant or tissue transplant. People have opinions about everything. Organ transplant is one that can be a touchy subject, but I am living proof that it saves lives. I hope, because of that, I hope that you'll stick around in this video, and even if you don't agree with transplant, I would like you to stick around just so that you can hear my story and the impact that this has had on me. Just the emotions that I've had to go through as a recipient of the gift of life. And so again, I just ask that you're here with an open heart and an open mind. This video has been one that, just something that can be, that I think will be difficult for me to articulate all the different thoughts that I have behind it. So bear with me, but thank you guys in advance for those that are sticking around. And I also want to say my thoughts and prayers are with all the families of loved ones who have lost a loved one, whether they are an organ donor or not. My thoughts are with you, my prayers are with you, because loss is not an easy thing to go through. And I'm going to be talking about loss in this video, so if that is a trigger for you. Most transplants, that means that there's loss involved, and obviously there are transplants that can be done by living donors, and they are just as important, and we need more living donors because the demand is so high and there are not enough donors, thankfully, right, I guess, because then people aren't dying at a fast rate, which is a good thing. The first part I want to start off is the type of transplant that I received and what it involves in my specific situation and how transplant was to me. I'm going to talk a little bit in some medical lingo, pull up some actual terms so I sound smart and sound like I know what I'm talking about. Try to anyways. If this is your first video that you're watching from me, hello. I have a disability called osteogenesis imperfecta. I've done 8 million videos about it, not really, but a lot of videos about it, so you can click in one of these corners. I always forget which side the iCard is on because it flips when I edit. Click on this iCard and you can learn about what osteogenesis imperfecta is. One of the conditions that is associated with osteogenesis imperfecta is severe scoliosis. There are many different types of osteogenesis imperfecta, but I have type 3, which is the second most severe type of OI. And so, again, one of the associated conditions with osteogenesis imperfecta type 3 is scoliosis. Scoliosis is the curvature of the spine, and for individuals with type 3, the progression of scoliosis is rapid and severe, and there are a lot of different individual factors to consider when and if it is appropriate to correct the scoliosis, the curve in the spine. So that's a decision that I can't make for you and I can't advise you on, but I can link the playlist where I go from beginning to end of this journey of what the correction process has been like, and made the decision to decide to go along with this, for me, life-threatening scoliosis, and it started impacting my internal organ. My liver was at one point larger than the lung capacity I had left, and I do not have an enlarged liver, so kind of puts things in perspective. Like one of my first questions to her, knowing the severity of my curve, like I wanted to know what tools were going to be utilized to try to correct my curve in the best way possible. We obviously knew it would never be perfect given the severity. So Harrington rods and then pedicle screws, and there's also 2 different types of clips. I'll insert pictures. It's pretty crazy, actually, when I stop and think about just all the different things that are in my spine. I believe there are different avenues of obtaining a bone graft. Transplant route, and then there is, what I received is called an allograft. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not a medical expert, I'm just sharing my experience, but it's called an allograft. There's also where they can take, I think, a piece of your bone and from somewhere in your body, I forget where, graft it where it needs to be. But obviously, given my situation, they would not want to take a piece of bone like my hip or something and put it in my spine, because that would just require a lot, and given the time I was going to need to be under anesthesia and all that I was going to be put into, through that was not a safe option. They went the allograft route, and what I did not realize, I guess, I don't know where I thought the bone graft was going to come from, but coming out of this, I learned, my surgeon had told me, again during our discussion, you can click the iCard, but during our discussion she had told me, is when I learned that the bone graft that I received came from a registered organ donor. With this type of donation that I received, it came from a deceased organ donor, not a living donor. That was pretty heavy news for me because, like I said, I guess I didn't realize, like I didn't know where the bone graft was going to come from. I guess I didn't really even think about it. You hear of like cadaver bone being utilized sometimes, but I don't know if they even really do that anymore. I'm not a medical expert, I'm just sharing with you what I know and through my experience. So I guess I don't know where I thought it was going to come from. It was pretty heavy news for me to hear that it came from a deceased organ donor, and given the severity of my scoliosis and the fact that it was impacting my internal organ, my case of scoliosis was considered life-threatening if unaddressed, because the concern was in like 10 years or less, if I did nothing, that I would require the use of a ventilator full-time, meaning need to be trached and or eventually go in cardiac arrest, because the spine would eventually compress onto my heart and lungs, making them no longer operable. The severity of my scoliosis, how big and major of a situation that I was in. By going through this fusion successfully, I received the gift of life. I received the gift of a longer life. And obviously, God doesn't guarantee us a certain amount of days here on earth. Given, just because I had the spinal fusion does not mean that I'm going to live for 70 more years. But, you know, like, we're not guaranteed tomorrow. I can guess and I can hope that I'm going to be around for a while, and that he has great plans for me. Just going through this fusion alone gave me the gift of a longer life, knowing that this tissue transplant came from a deceased organ donor. I quite literally received the gift of life, like almost in a second way, in an additional way. Someone else's loss, I received life. And even though, again, I'm going to say this a few times in this video, but even though I didn't receive a heart, a kidney, a pair of lungs, a liver, major organ, like for me, because my scoliosis was life-threatening if left unaddressed. Like, this bone graft was just as important for me as an organ, because I needed this fusion in order to live, and in order to live a long time, or at least hopefully live a long time. And people don't think of scoliosis as a medical condition that can impact your life expectancy. And for 99% of people, I would say 99.9% of people, it's not. It's a extremely mild condition. Over 9 million people in the US alone have scoliosis, and most of them probably don't even know that they have it. And so I'm part of that 1%, that 0.5% of people that does go down that road. That's why I want to shed light on scoliosis and the different severities of it, and that this can be a condition that can impact someone's life in a huge, huge way. And it's not always these minor scenarios that you, more often than not, you don't see cases like this. You see cases like this. So because of that, and the amount of risk that I was taking just in general of going through this fusion, my team had to utilize every bit of hardware, every tool, and in this case an allograft, a bone graft, every tool that they could do, that she could, to make sure that my spine could be as good as could make it with the condition that it was in, and be sustainable for me. And so part of that, one of those tools, was a bone graft. People may think that it's not a big of a deal. You don't realize what that means to receive something from someone you don't even know, and they've given you, like, they're no longer here earthside, and you receive a piece of them so that you can live. Like, no matter how big or small a transplant is, or how important it is, it still has value and importance, because you obviously were in some type of situation that enough to where you needed it, or else the doctors and surgeons would not have implanted it into me, or into you. I was just really surprised and taken back by it, like, just in awe, I guess, because I don't know, I guess I just don't know where I thought it'd come from. But there were so many people. One of the things that I often talk about, both in my heel traction experience and my spinal fusion experience, is that there were so many people involved in this for me, and this life-saving experience. So many doctors and surgeons and nursing staff and hospitality staff, radiologists, like, so many people over the past several months, almost a year, to get me to this point, to where I am today, and get me to a place where I'm able to share with you this miracle and the success story. So many medical personnel, so many people, so many of my friends and family rallied around me during that time, and people that I don't even know have been a part of this process now, being my donor and their family. And they will never know the impact that it's had on me, and how grateful I am for their gift and the ultimate gift of life. And so I want to share with you a little bit more of the medical side of it, and then I'll also get into sharing kind of what it means to me to be a transplant recipient. Obviously I've already shared a little bit, but I received a allograft, and the medical definition of an allograft is a tissue or organ obtained from one member of a species and grafted to a genetically dissimilar member of the same species, so obviously in this case, human to human. I also would like to talk a little bit about how the bone graft that I specifically received works. So I'll put a little infographic here too, because it can might be a little bit hard to follow. But what I received is a bone graft, and there's different transplants in the tissue transplant group. So once I get into sharing about the organization 125 Lives and how I'm connected with them, I'll share more of the different types of transplants and tissues that can be transplanted. Donated bones can be used to improve or restore mobility in some patients. The bone acts like magic. It actually disintegrates over time and stimulates new bone cell growth in its place. This means that after a period of time, the recipient's own bone generates. Bone provides a scaffolding in a lot of situations where a recipient receives a prosthetic. The bone is there as a support to help the body adjust and accept the new implant. But for me, I want to go over what applies to me and how I had a spinal fusion, so the bone graft was implanted in between my vertebrae to help fuse it together. And so over time, this doesn't mention, so I don't know for how long I have the donor bone. I may not even have it anymore inside of, for a certain amount of time. I have or had, I'm not sure. I know I had it at some point, but I don't know if it's still there or if my own cell growth has taken over yet. It actually disintegrates over time, and my own cell growth will take over, bone cell regrowth will take over, and I will have OI bone in that area again, which is a bummer, because it's nice, it was probably some good quality bone, not used to having, but it does disintegrate over time, and I will have my own bone in its place, which the human body is amazing. And even just learning about this small transplant that I had, it knows and it can accept this transplant, and that my own body knows to take over, and this new cell regrowth is happening, is just absolutely incredible and amazes me. So it acts as a bridge, and it's just there temporarily, and it's not something that I will have forever, but this bone graft was crucial for me because it acted as a bridge, and without it, my spine would have not been able to fuse as properly and as successfully, given the degree of my curve. And again, going through this spinal fusion as a whole gave me the gift of life. And so every tool, every piece of hardware, every graft that I received was just as important as any other aspect of the fusion. I just think that it's incredible. Like I said, it's a bummer. I will eventually have OI bone back in its place again, which, yeah, I don't know what part of the bone I received, but I guess there's probably different layers of bone. I don't know, but it's probably better quality than what I have, because as you guys know, OI bone quality is not good, which causes all my issues in the first place. It's too bad in this case that my body is smart and knows to take over, because it's good quality bone in there. So that's a little bit about how the bone graft affects me and the role that it played in my spinal fusion and the success of that, and how it helped be able to straighten my spine. So the bone graft is used as a bridge to, I'm actually reading a little bit about, because I like to give you guys as much information as I can. So a bone graft is used as a solid bridge between the two vertebral segments in the spine to stop the movement in that section of the spine. Bone graft or bone graft substitute is needed to create the environment for the solid bridge to form. Graft does not form a fusion at surgery. Instead, the bone graft provides the foundation and environment to allow the body to grow new bone. This is where this comes. Allows the body to grow new bone and fuse section of the spine together in one long bone. At the time of surgery, instrumentation, screws, and rods is typically used to provide stability for that section of the spine for the first few months of surgery. Over the long term, a solid fusion of bone that is healed together provides stability. So more specifically, this is how it benefits fusion patients. Another fun fact that I learned when I had a discussion with my surgeon, when she told me that they did end up doing a bone graft from a deceased organ donor, one of my questions was, because obviously I've never been a recipient of anything from an organ donor before, one of my questions was, can my body reject it? Because even though it's not an organ, it still comes from somebody that has different DNA than me. And nobody ever mentioned anything about finding me a match or anything. So when they do a bone graft, the part of the bone that they utilize is actually the part of the bone that doesn't have any cells, which is really, really cool. So what that means is it basically provides the opportunity for anyone to be a recipient of a bone graft, and they don't need to go through the process of finding someone a match for the graft. So the part of bone that, again, does not have any cells, therefore it's nearly impossible for my body to reject a graft. It's incredible to me. Medical technology is just amazing at what they're able to do now. A lot of people asked me in the beginning when I shared about my tissue transplant, a bone graft, they asked me, like, do I need to be on, like, anti-rejection medication as a result of this, of being of that? And now you know that I do not, because it does not have any cells. Therefore, my body cannot reject it, and they didn't need to find me a match, which is so, so cool. That's medically how the bone graft played a huge part in the spinal fusion for me and the success, because like I said, we were so limited on what could be done to correct my spine that my surgeons had to utilize anything that she could correct it, and in this case for me it meant an allograft, a bone graft. So now I want to talk a little bit just about the emotional side of being a recipient of something from a deceased organ donor, in this case tissue donor as well, and the opportunity that I had to write a letter to my donor family. And I, first of all, just want to thank the families and the individuals out there that are registered to be organ and tissue donors, because I'm living proof that they save lives, and there is truly no greater gift that you could give someone than the gift of life. And at 22 years old, never expected to be a recipient of something from an organ donor, and you never expect it to be you until it happens to you. And I just have this, as soon as I found out that this bone graft came from deceased organ donor, I had the additional overwhelming sense of gratitude for the gift of life that I received through not only this fusion, but the tool and the resource of the bone graft from someone's loved one. And until you are a recipient of something like that, you have no idea what it's like to be a recipient of something that has quite literally given you life. But there's also this other side of transplant, and the harsh reality that in order for someone to receive a tissue transplant or an organ transplant, that means someone's life is lost, and they're no longer earthside with their friends and family. And so there's the aspect of, at least for me, survivor guilt, because obviously either the individual or the family on their behalf made the decision to be an organ donor, a tissue donor. But there's this sense of guilt of, like, how come I get to live, someone else's loved one had to die? And obviously, like, none of us are here on earth forever. Life is just a gift through someone else's loss, pain, and grief. And there's other side of that comes with transplant of joy and gratitude for the recipient of receiving life. And there's just not a lot of words to describe it. And there's just, I think about my donor all the time. I think about my donor family all the time and what they had to go through if the family made that decision. So that's kind of the, I guess, emotional side of what it's like to be a tissue transplant recipient, because I realized the reality of what someone else had to go through and experience in order for me to receive this gift. Because of their gift, I am still able to be here with my friends and family. I'm still able to treasure every day and accomplish really great and really big things. Because of their gift, I get to sit here today and share with you about this gift of life. I know that it didn't come without pain, heartache, and sacrifice from someone else, and realize the magnitude of that. It's something that I think about every day. I promise to never take for granted this gift or forget that this came from a donor, another human being, someone else's loved one. I promise to do such great things in this world with the gift of life. These are just really difficult things to articulate, and I just feel like there's a lot to say, but in the same way it's hard to know things to articulate. I had the opportunity to write a letter to my donor family through an organization called 125 Lives. So I'm going to pull up their website because I have a few things that I want to share with you. Where you live and tissue transplant that you receive, different donor bank of like where these transplants are managed and accounted for. So my specific transplant, my bone graft, was distributed from a service or like company called Community Tissue Services. They're in Kettering, Ohio, so they like manage all the tissue transplants, like I guess around Michigan. Community Tissue Services is partnered with an organization called 125 Lives, and 125 Lives raises awareness of the importance of tissue donation, and they also give the recipients the opportunity to connect with their donor family. I am overall like grouped in as a tissue transplant recipient, but within the tissue transplant recipient world, there's different categories of a tissue transplant and things that can be transplanted, so I wanted to share with you some of those things. Skin is something that can be transplanted. Corneas, the transparent tissue of the eye that covers the iris and pupil, which help the eye focus as light makes its way through. Heart valves can also be donated, and saphenous and femoral veins, ligaments and tendons, and bone, which is bone grafts. Again, bone grafts are used by surgeons to repair or replace bone after serious injury, bone cancer, or disease. They're used to treat a wide variety of medical conditions such as spine surgery, joint reconstruction, and the treatment of trauma. So those are the different aspects of tissues that can be donated and transplanted into someone else. So the reason that this organization is called 125 Lives is because tissue transplants can save up to 125 lives, and so that's where they came up with this organization name. So through community tissue services like the donate, and then they're partnered with 125 Lives, which gives the opportunity for donor recipients to reach out to their donor family. During your recent surgery, you received a gift of donated human tissue. Your tissue donor may have made the decision to donate while still alive, or the decision may have been made by the individual's family because they wanted to help someone like you. Donor families find great comfort in receiving a thank you note or letter from a recipient of their loved one's gifts. It gives you the opportunity to let them know how their loved one's gift of tissue donation has helped restore someone else's life. Surgeon and I had the conversation when she originally told me that this transplant came from a deceased organ donor. One of my first questions to her was, can I thank my donor family? Because I was just like so in awe that something from someone who is no longer here at Earthside and given me the gift of life. And that was one of my first questions to her. And at first, she didn't think that tissue transplants were tracked the same as like an organ donation, and so I was super bummed about that. But then a few days later, someone from like the transplant team or whatever came by, or like surgery team came by and dropped off this brochure. That's when I learned about 125 Lives and that I would have to write a letter to my donor family. I was really excited that tissue transplants are tracked and accounted for the same as organ transplants, obviously through different organizations, because organs are not, or tissues are not organs. So as soon as I got home after my very long hospital stay, of 28 days, a couple of months later, I finally took the time to send in my brochure. And the way the brochure works is, so on the brochure there is a barcode. I blurred that out for safety reasons, but there's a barcode they can use to track my donor family in their database, and with that barcode or code, they can type it into their system. They'll know the person's of who I received the transplant from. And so that's how that works, and that's how they find out whose donor is who and who received what from what donor. So that's how that works. And it took me a couple of months to finally take the time to write the letter, because at 22 years old, I never imagined A, being a tissue transplant recipient of a deceased organ donor, but B, also just having the opportunity to thank my donor family and share my story and what their gift means to me and what this gift has and will allow me to do. I finally did write the letter, and I really love how the letter turned out. I asked the organization if I could also submit photos, so I did print out some physical photos of my journey to share those with my donor family and to send along with my letter. And so I mailed that in. I really love how the letter turned out, and I'm glad that I do, because it was a very difficult letter to write. Like, what do you possibly say to someone that has gone through some and heartache, and yet there's this other side of it, that because of their ultimate gift, they've given someone life. Very humbling experience to be able to write that and share that. So I don't know if my letter was ever received. Donor families have the opportunity to not receive the letter. They will be notified that I have reached out and have opened the door. They have the opportunity to not even receive the letter, or they have the opportunity to receive the letter and not respond, put my contact information, and in case my donor family did want to connect with me, which would have been amazing, but they have the opportunity to not even receive the letter. They will be notified that the recipient has interest in sharing a letter with them, but again, they don't have to receive it, or they can receive it and not respond, or they can receive it and respond and have a connection with the recipient. In my case, I didn't even know if my brochure and letters were received, so I had to reach out to the organization to see if it was even received, and it was. And at the time, they were trying to find my donor family, but at this time, like 5 months later, 6 months later, I have not heard from the organization or from my donor family. And going into writing this letter, I had to, because as much as amazing it would be to know more about my donor and to put a name to whose gift this was from and how amazing it would be to meet my donor family, I also had to be at peace with the reality that I may never know, because they have a right to that connecting with the recipient, and I totally respect that and wholeheartedly understand that. I know that my donor family, my donor is looking down from heaven and knows who I am, and I just pray that they see how grateful I am for their gift and that I will use it to accomplish great things in this world and make the world a better place. So like I said, from this point forward, I've heard nothing else from the organization, or even if they found my donor family, I don't know. But again, going into writing that letter, I had to be at peace with the reality that I may go on with the rest of my life and having received this gift and never know anything about my donor family. And I wanted to use this platform to shed light on my experience as a tissue transplant recipient. Someone may see this and be impacted by this to register as an organ donor or tissue donor, because again, I'm living proof that it saves lives. I think of my donor and their family every day, my donor family every day, what they must go through receiving a letter in the mail that their loved one saved someone's life. So I'm just really grateful that I had the opportunity to write a letter to my donor family, and I'm thankful for organizations like 125 Lives that gives recipients the opportunity, and I've opened that door. One day. I'm always here, and I respect their privacy and everything that they've gone through, and I'm just really, really grateful for them, and yeah, there's truly just no words. Throughout sharing my experience as a transplant recipient, people have been wanting updates on whether I've heard back, but you just have to realize, like, there's this really sad side of transplant. Like, it may be too hard for the donor family to connect with their recipient. It may be just too painful, too sad, too difficult, too much of a reminder that their loved one is no longer here. Don't have interest in connecting with the recipient, and that's as awesome as it would be to be able to meet my donor family and have that be a part of my story. They're a part of my life and my story forever, because I would not be here today if it weren't for their gift. Pretty much it in this video. I just wanted to share my gratitude and my experience medically and emotionally and physically as a recipient of tissue transplant, and shed light on how much tissue transplants can save lives. We all hear about organ transplant, but not a lot about tissue transplant. In cases like mine, they are just as important. And so I will put a link down in the description box below where you can register to become an organ and tissue donor. Obviously, I hope not a donor for many, many decades. There's nothing in this life that we could take with us. The best thing, the greatest thing we could do is leave behind a gift for someone else, the gift of life. And I just think it's also just a gift at how far we've come with medical technology to be able to do this, to allow people to leave behind the ultimate gift of life and be able to transplant that into someone else. It's just it continues to be mind-blowing. I am registered as a organ and tissue donor. I doubt they will take anything from me because of my osteogenesis imperfecta, but medical technology continues to advance, so at a point, if it becomes a thing, I hope to be able to be helpful in that way many decades from now. But thank you guys for allowing me to share this miracle with you, and also the really hard reality that I was faced with realizing that through someone else's loss, I received life, and there is just no words to articulate that feeling. But thank you guys for allowing me to share the vulnerable and very special aspect of my spinal fusion journey with you. I honestly never expected donation to be a part of my story. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!